Last week we talked about obstruction, and when a runner is obstructed, there's going to be a minimum of one base. So now in Rule 8, they talk about the different types of awards in terms of the number of bases. So we'll take a quick look, and we're going to get into a more level detail in subsequent charts, but the number of bases that are going to be awarded is either going to be 4, 3, 2, or 1, or possibly actually none. So we're going to go through all 5 of those scenarios. So for a 4-base award, obviously that's going to be related to a home run, whether if the ball exits the field over the outfield fence, or whether or not it is prevented from going over the outfield fence for a number of different reasons, one being an illegal glove or mitt, or even a detached glove or mitt. So 4 bases, that's pretty simple. The ball's got to exit over the outfield fence. 3 bases, that gets into things like an illegal glove or a mitt. But the key here, the key takeaway is, in order to award 3 bases, the scenario is that it has to be a ball over fair ground, and it has to be a ball that is touched by a detached equipment, which is either thrown, tossed, or kicked. That's an intentional act. So for a 3-base award, it has to be a ball over fair ground, and it is the result of an intentional act of throwing, kicking, or tossing a fielder's equipment, glove, and it has to make contact with the baseball. 2 bases, again, it has to be a fair batted ball. And there are a number of different scenarios for a 2-base award, whether if it's a pitch, touches an illegal glove or a mitt, goes into the stands, lodges in the fence, thrown by a pitcher. There are some special situations if we have 2 runners between the same base and we have an overthrow into dead ball territory. That's a 2-base award. But there are going to be times when the trailing runner will only receive a 1-base award, because we're going to make the award on the lead runner first, and then whatever award the trailing runner gets, he gets as the result of the lead runner's position on the base. One-base award, if a pitch or a throw from the pitcher's pitching position. And this is predominantly what you'll see for a 1-base award. It addresses a lot of plays from the pitch or the pitcher's pitching position. Fair or foul, caught by a fielder who then leaves the field of play by stepping or falling into a bench or a dugout, is a 1-base award. Or for some private schools, there may be a rope or a chalk line which delineates between the field of play and dead ball area. So there's a rule out there that talks about what happens when a fielder enters into dead ball territory. Another unique situation has to do with a runner who may deliberately attempt to put the ball out of play in order to protect the advancement of some of the runners around the base. So when it is a deliberate attempt to kill the play, then we're going to award 2 bases. So again, this is just at the 40-foot thousand level. We're going to talk about each one of these in subsequent charts, but I wanted to cover all the rule sets that are out there. So we talked about 4 bases, 3 bases, 2, and 1. There's actually some scenarios where the umpire, can determine how many bases a runner would be awarded. And in order to nullify a number of different things like obstruction or spectator interference. Again, for most of us at the high school level, the public schools, they're fully enclosed, so we really shouldn't have to deal with spectator interference. But some of the private schools may be a little bit more open, where that may come into play. So we cover that here. as part of our review. One base award beyond the last legally acquired base, and again, if it's in the umpire's judgment that if a player would have earned an advancement beyond the minimum one base award, then we're going to award that runner the bases we believe they would have achieved if the ball was not prematurely stopped play. So if you go into the rule book, obviously there's a running awards table, base running awards table. So what we're going to try and do in the next series of charts is to go through each of these, the 4 base award, the 3 base award, 2, 1, and judgment, and try and give you a better understanding as to how to award and when to award. When we look at base awards, actually, let me stop. I don't have a question chart, but let me go ahead and stop here and see if there are any questions or comments from Norm, Tim. I think Jerry's online before we go ahead to the next phase of base award.
Okay, Greg, there was one question that was concerning obstruction. It's a pretty good question. The question was, when a fielder has complete, firm, and secure possession of a baseball, does he have to allow any path to the base? And no, he does not. He can block the bases if he has firm and secure possession of the ball. Does not have to provide any access to the base. The only other question we had was a procedural one, which I think I answered to the person who asked it.
Okay, thank you, Norm. Okay, so we have base awards, so we need to determine how many bases are we going to award a runner, and that will vary depending upon the situation. But there are other key elements to awarding bases. Who are we going to award? Is it going to be just the batter only? Is it going to be the batter runner only? Is it going to be a combination thereof where it's a batter and runners? So we need to make sure that we understand who is being awarded. How many bases are going to be awarded? Generally, usually, normally, most of the time, awards are going to be predetermined, as we just took a quick look. You know, so that's going to be situation dependent, whether if it's 1 base, 2, 3, or 4. But there will be times where umpire judgment, and we just had a question on obstruction, and last week on obstruction, or even loose equipment, there will be times when we, the umpire, will have to make a judgment as to how many bases we feel is appropriate for that play. From where, this is probably one of the more important points that we're going to have to make sure we understand well. Are we going to award bases, regardless of the number of bases? Are we going to award that from what starting point? Is it going to be from the time of the pitch, from the time of the infraction, or the time of the throw? So awarding 2 bases from the time of a pitch, you might say, okay, we could potentially give a batter second base. Or, you know, we could have time of the throw, in which case a batter might actually get more than second base. So where we start from is just as important as to how many bases we're going to award our players. There are going to be times where we're going to ignore the award altogether. We talked about a coach's choice, where we may have a base award situation, and the coach may get to choose to either take the penalty, which would be to award the base, or take the result of the play. So there are scenarios where we will ignore the award and the play will stand. Some examples here for obstruction. Obstruction on the batter is ignored if the batter runner reaches first base and all other runners advance at least 1 base. If each runner advances to a base, which he would have reached, and then we just talked about the coach's option where he may take the result of the play rather than the award. So Good stuff. Okay, from where? So now these next couple of charts are going to try and describe in some way, maybe give you some visualization as to where do we start from when we talk about base awards. So we talked about a violation where we may award as a result of a violation, or we may award as a result of the stoppage of play. When we have a violation, that's obviously a defensive infraction. There are times where you might have some non-game personnel, like spectator interference, but that should not be the norm. So for a defensive infraction, we talked about, again, obstruction, catcher's interference, hit by pitch, any equipment. So the award is going to be based upon the base that is occupied at the time of the infraction. So we need to know where our runners are at the time of the infraction. Have they obtained a base? Are they between bases? That sort of thing. For non-game personnel, spectator interference, but again, it's going to be the same thing, the base occupied at the time of the infraction. For stoppage, it's going to be for a fair ball that exits the field of play or is lodged in some place, whether that's someone's equipment or whether if it's lodged in or under a fence. Also for stoppage, a fair ball from the pitching position. So the key here is for any type of stoppage related award, we're talking about balls that are fair. We're not going to be awarding any bases on any balls that are in foul territory. So for fair balls on a fly, we talked about a home run on the ground. That's the fence, or it may roll into the dugout. And there are some unique scenarios about balls going into the dugout. And these are going to be from the base occupied at the time of the pitch. From the pitching position, the ball could get lodged in the backstop fence, could get lodged in the catcher or umpire's uniform or equipment. So again, that too is going to be the same. It's going to be from the time of the pitch. So here's our the nomenclature, the language for base awards as it relates to violations and infractions. And examples are the balk, detached player equipment, illegal glove, and again, the award is going to be based on the base occupied at the time of the infraction. If any pitch, followed by a dead ball. Many of us are familiar with a ground rule double. We have a pitch, ball's hit, ball gets lodged somewhere in the outfield. That's a ground rule double. A lot of us see that from time to time. So a pitch followed by a dead ball, the award is going to be based upon the time of the pitch. And here are some scenarios for the stoppage. So the big difference between the two, the infraction is going to occur from the time of the infraction. For the stoppage, it's the award is from the time of pitch. So what I thought I would do is go through each of these scenarios into a little bit more detail. And I thought I would start with the most least occurrence, a 3-base award and a 4-base award. Then that's followed by what we might see a little bit more often, which would be multiple bases. And then followed by what we usually normally see most of the time, which is going to be a 1 or a 2-base award. So again, I don't have a stoppage chart, a question chart. Let me just stop here and see if there are any questions that have come in at this point in time. Norm, Tim, comments or questions?
Listen, at one point you were talking about no base awards on balls that weren't fair. You're forgetting about catching a ball in foul territory and falling into a dugout, something like that. There would be a base award there.
There is, and I actually have a chart on that. That was the exception that I was going to cover later.
Okay.
But good question. Good pickup, guys.
And there's no other questions yet.
Okay. All All right, so there's a lot of text from here on out because base awards is a lot to consume. There's a lot to think about and a lot for us to understand. So I apologize for throwing up a lot of text. I'll do it as gently as possible, but there's really no there's no way of getting around it. So for a 3-base award, we're talking about a batted ball that is touched with an illegal glove or mitt that is either thrown, tossed, or kicked or held by a fielder. Again, the comment here is this is an intentional act. The second criteria for a 3-base award is we're talking about balls that are on fair ground or is a fair ball while on or over foul ground, and that's really the bounding ball. But again, the criteria here is a batted ball, an intentional act, thrown, tossed, or kicked, and we're talking about fair balls. Detached player equipment or illegal equipment does not cause this type of play to immediately become dead. Just like we might have batter's interference, this is going to be a delayed dead ball. We're going to allow the play to continue and allow the runners to advance to the base or actually beyond the base that they would have achieved if this violation had not occurred. If it happens to be the result of an illegal glove or mitt and it's discovered, this is one of the 3 scenarios where the coach gets to choose to take the result of the play or to go ahead and take the base award. Okay, here comes up our first video. We have 3 scenarios that we'll talk about a 3-base award as it relates to detached equipment. So let's go ahead and start. Before I start, we've been having some technical problems, so this is going to be the only video that you're going to see tonight. I take that back. This is going to be the only video you're going to see tonight that looks like the other videos. After this video, we're going to go back to our normal embedded video in the PowerPoint where you're going to see some choppiness. Until we can resolve the technical issues, we're just going to have to live with one or the other from here on out. So let's go ahead and show our first video.
And Guana says, come on down here. And he threw it up with his right hand. I've seen triple plays I've been lucky enough to look at. I have never seen a player throw his glove at the ball. And coming back, he let the...
When Rutledge got last season on, played back glove ball, didn't. And hit off the glove, knee one away.
Okay, so there were actually, again, technical difficulty. I lost one of the 2 videos. So in our first clip, we had no runners on base, fair batted ball. Again, the key there, fair batted ball. We have the second key, intentionally thrown glove. We have our third key, makes contact with the baseball. So in this particular scenario, we're going to award our batter, who's now become a batter runner, 3 bases because for whatever reason, our pitcher intentionally threw the glove and it made contact with the ball. The second clip, which you didn't get a chance to see, we have no runners on base, fair batted ball. Again, another scenario where it's an intentionally thrown glove, makes contact with the baseball. The batter runner is going to be awarded 3 base. So that's very similar to what we saw in our first clip. In our last clip, we have a runner on first base. We have a fair batted ball. We have an intentionally thrown glove, so we seem to be meeting the criteria here. But in our third clip, we do not have contact. The glove does not make contact with the baseball. So even though Kershaw threw the glove at the ball, there was no contact. So as a result of no contact, there actually is no violation for that particular play. So he made the play to first base, so our batter runner is going to be out, and R1 had advanced to second, so he will remain at second base. So again, the takeaway here is it has to be an intentional act. There has to be contact between the illegal glove with the baseball in order to get the 3-base award. In the Kershaw example, if there is no contact, we're going to allow the play to continue and allow the play to stand. Here's a case play, fairly similar to what we see. B1 hits a fair line drive. Again, there's our key word there, fair. Over the head of our F5, he jumps high, attempting to field the ball. As he jumps, we potentially have two scenarios. His glove accidentally dislodged from his hand and touches the ball, or he throws his glove at the ball. B1 has not reached first at the time of the touch. So here's where judgment comes into play. If an umpire decides that the detached glove was not thrown or tossed intentionally, just as then there is no penalty. But if the umpire should decide that it was a deliberate act, then we're going to advance B1 to third base. Okay, now for a 4-base award, these are normally going to be home runs or those that are prevented from being a home run. So this is the only scenario where we get a 4-base award. Again, we're talking about a fair ball that goes over the fence in flight, or it hits the foul pole above the fence. Those are the two scenarios where we're going to make a 4-base award. So here we have an example of a fair foul pole, and we have two scenarios where it hits the fair foul pole in scenario A and lands into fair territory, or we have another scenario as in B where it hits the pole and lands in foul territory. So in A and in B, it is going to be judged as a home run because the fair foul pole is a fair foul marker, if you will, regardless of where the ball lands after that touch of the fair foul pole, we're going to judge that as a home run. And in a scenario where it was potentially a home run, but prevented from being a home run as a result of either an illegal glove or a tossed glove or mitt, then we're going to award 4 bases as a result of that violation. Now, here's actually an interesting scenario. This is Oakton High School, and what they did here is they actually had the fence line 4 foot high, as we normally see, but they extended in right field the fence above that 4 foot marker and now created, I guess, their version of the green monster. So if we have a ball exiting the field, as in example 1, 2, and 3, that's going to be a home run. So even though in example 2 it hits the fence and it exits the field, that is a home run, just like in example 1 and 2. If it hits their version of the green monster, as in example 4, and lands back on the playing field, then we just treat that as any other 4 foot fence. It's a live ball and you're going to play on. But here's the unique situation with this field. The upward extension, which used to be the yellow extension, which used to be the old fair foul pole, is no longer a fair foul pole. It is now an extension of the foul line. And as a result, any ball that hits that yellow pole is really hitting a fair foul line. So if it hits the pole, then it has kicked up chalk, if you will. It leaves the field of play. Then that's going to be a ground rule double, just like as if it were to have hit a bounding ball, as in 5A, and bounces out of play. It's unique. I don't know of any other field out there, but I thought this was interesting enough to show that we used to have a fair foul home run pole, if you will, which actually has now turned into a fair foul line. Here's the case play. B1 hits a long fly ball to left field. Our fielder goes back, leaps, but is not able to touch the fly ball. The ball then rebounds off the fence, strikes the fielder's glove, and ricochets over the fence in fair territory. Is this a home run or a ground rule double? This would be considered a ground rule double because the ball did not exit the field on its own merit. The action secondary to the hit, the ball ricocheting off the fence and then off the fielder's glove, caused the ball to go into dead ball territory. So we're going to rule that as a ground rule double, not a home run. So we talked about 3 base awards, we talked about 4 base awards, so now let's go ahead and talk about plays where there's some judgment involved, particularly loose equipment, and we actually see this from time to time, whether it's a bat, whether it's catchers, shin guards, or what have you. So there are scenarios here, as well as obstruction, where we are going to make judgments as to how many bases to negate either the presence of the loose equipment or the obstruction that occurred on our runners. And again, we're going to make a determination and impose penalties that will negate any of these penalties that are occurred by the defense. Okay, case play, R2 is on second base, 1 out, B3 gets a base hit, line drive to short center field. Our R2 advances to third base. Our throw from the outfield to F5 in an attempt to put out R2. The ball gets by F5 and is prevented from entering the dugout by a shin guard left on the field by the defense. And that can happen, probably more frequently than you might think. The plate umpire, based upon the circumstances of the play, he would have judged that the ball would have entered the dugout had it not been for the shin guards left outside the dugout. So we're going to award R2 home and B3 second base. So we're going to make an award based upon our judgment that if the shin guards had not been there, then we would have the ball going into the dugout anyway. Here's another similar situation with shin guards left on the field. No outs, R2 is obstructed rounding third. R1 had advanced beyond second. We have an interference by F3. R1 advances to third. F5 an attempt to put out R1. Ball gets by F5 and is prevented from entering the dugout by the shin guard left on the field. So what we're going to do here, this is a little bit more complicated. We actually have a number of things going on. We have the obstruction, we have the interference, and now we have to deal with the shin guards. We might not see all of this, but we actually could see 2 of the 3 examples here where it's obstruction and a shin guard or interference and a shin guard. The reason for putting this here is, okay, let's see how we can deal with all 3 of these situations. We're going to deal with the obstruction occurred because that is what occurred first. So we're going to deal with that first. R2 was obstructed after he rounded third, so he'd be awarded home. If he were obstructed before he had reached third, the umpire may award him home. Again, that's a judgment. If we felt that he would have reached home base. After we deal with the obstruction, then we deal with the interference, where we place R1 on second. And then we finally get to the ball touching the shin guard. And in this particular case, we're going to ignore it because it occurred after the interference, where that was an immediate dead ball. So radar's up, guys. You have to know when the ball's live. And in this particular scenario, if we have the equipment, then we'll deal with it because the ball was live. But in this scenario, the ball was dead. So now we'd have no interference by the shin guards. So with that, I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments before I move on from Tim or Norm.
No questions at this time.
Okay. So when we talk about judgment, we're talking about making a judgment as to how many bases, but there's actually a judgment that may occur prior to that judgment. For instance, here where we have a ball that is lodged in the outfield, and we can have that at the high school level where it gets caught up in the fencing, and hopefully that should be fairly obvious than not. If we see a ball around or near under a fence area, one of the things that we're going to look for is whether or not there's a player making a reach for the ball. If the player is making a reach for the ball, that may give us an indication that we're going to allow that play to continue and we may not kill it. Or there may be situations where it appears to be playable, and as you can see, our fielder is throwing up his hands. And my comment there is just because the fielder is throwing up the hands doesn't necessarily mean that it is not playable. Here's a closer look of the ball being stuck underneath the padding. I know we don't have padding at the high school level, but we could have the situation where they stop play and that was a decision on their part, not because the ball was not retrievable. And in this particular case, we had our base umpire go out and he made a judgment, hey, that was a playable ball. Sorry, we're going to allow the play to stand, whatever that may be. So going through each of these scenarios, in our first example, fairly obvious, immediate dead ball, and we're going to make awards. In our second example, it may not be as obvious. No need to kill the play right away. Always better to let the play to continue, because if you need to fix something, it's better to fix it after you've allowed the play to continue versus killing it prematurely. If a player reaches, generally, usually, normally, most of the time, that's a sign that that's a playable ball. So we're not going to award any bases. And in our last scenario, just because the player puts up his hands does not automatically mean that it is a dead ball. That's his judgment. That's not your judgment. And if it requires you as a base umpire to go out, that's one of the reasons why you allow the play to continue. Allow the play to continue to its completion, and then when the completion finishes, base guys, if you need to go out, then go out and make a judgment. You can always reverse it if you have to, but in this particular example, we've judged it as a playable ball, so the play is going to stand, and there will be no award of any bases. So again, I'll stop here real quick to see if there are any questions or comments. Norm, Tim?
No questions at this time.
Okay. Now we're going to get into what is usually the most occurrences that we're going to see, the 1 and the 2 base award. So as we discussed earlier, whether that's based upon a 1 base or 2 base award from a violation, or a 1 or 2 base award based upon stoppage. Again, I can't get around all this text that I'm going to show you guys because there's a lot here to cover. 2 bases for, again, our keyword here, fair batted ball, and now we're getting into a thrown ball that may get lodged in a fence or a player's equipment or umpire equipment, including a pitch that is touched by an illegal glove or mitt, or detached equipment, which is tossed, kicked, or thrown. Now, we talked earlier about a 3 base award for a batted ball. The difference between the two here is we're now talking about one of the differences is a thrown ball. So if you have a thrown ball that for whatever reason is involved with an illegal mitt or glove or detached, that's not the same as a batted ball. So the number of bases goes down from 3 to 2. We do see balls go into the stand or get lodged in the fence. Again, we talked about with runners between the same bases. On an overthrow into dead ball territory, the lead runner is going to receive a 2 base award, and the following runner is going to be awarded 1 base. So the following runner, in some cases, when it's a two-base award, in some cases, the following runner is only going to receive one base because the lead runner has received the number of awards as appropriate for the lead runner. Okay, here we are. We're now going to talk about equipment again. We're going to go back to our old format. This is an embedded video, so it's going to be a little choppy, but I think you should get the gist. Okay, so as innocent as that may have been on the catcher's part, it is still illegal. So, so we're going to rule that, and we're going to award our, you can see down below here, we have a runner on second. So we're going to award him a base as a result of the catcher preventing the ball from scooting farther away. So again, it's as innocent as it may be, we go ahead and call that. One base award from the base if it's a pitch or thrown from the pitching position. Generally, usually, normally, when we have a play initiated from the pitching position, that's going to be a stoppage where it goes into the stands or it gets lodged in the fence, umpire or catcher's equipment. And the key here, again, so this is the exception that Tim pointed out. With less than 2 outs, a batter hits a fair or a foul ball, fly or a line drive, which is caught by the fielder, then leaves the field of play by stepping, falling into the bench or dugout, chalk line if we may be at a private facility, or a pregame determined boundary line. So that's an example where we will also award bases based upon a foul fly that is caught with a batter, a fielder falling into dead ball territory. Okay, there are differences in awards. We talked about 1 versus 2 base award, and we have a little more after this, but I want to show these 2 videos. So they're fairly identical. So for the purpose of both videos, we have runners on base, there are outs, we have a ground ball to the infield, that's the same for both plays. We have an overthrow at first base, the same for both plays. The ball goes out of play, presume for the purposes of this example, in 1 and 2, the ball goes out of play. So let's talk about the differences between the 2 plays and the different base awards as a result of the differences between these 2 plays. It's subtle, but it's important. Let's go ahead and play our first play. So hopefully you saw that, as choppy as it might be. We have a ground ball to the second baseman. We have a throw to first, and the ball goes out of play. How many bases do you award the runners? In our second video, we have runners, in this particular case, runners on first and second. We have a ground ball to third base. Now we have runners who are forced to advance. We have a play at third, and we have the ball then thrown to first base, and the ball goes out of play. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at each of these 2 plays. In our first play, we have the first play by an infielder, and we have an overthrow at first base. In our second play, it's actually a subsequent play, may look the same, but we have our play at third for the force out of R2, and we have an overthrow at first base. So the two plays look fairly similar, where we have an overthrow to first base, but they are different. And as a result of their differences, we're going to make a different award. So in our first play, any pitch, batted or unbatted, is followed by a dead ball. Any award is from the base occupied at the time of the pitch. So for our runners, we're going to award as a result of the time of the pitch. In our second example, because we have an intervening play at third, the base award of our runners is now going to be from the time of the throw, not the time of the pitch. So there's a subtle distinction here. These appear to be plays by the infield to first base, but one has the first play by an infielder, the other is a subsequent play by the infielder. So we're going to award two bases, but now the starting point for those bases is going to be determined by example 1, time of the pitch, example 2, time of the throw. I have a couple examples here, but we're actually running out of time, so I'm going to skip these case plays, and I'll put them up so that if you want to look at them when we publish the recorded versions, we can do that. Here's another case play. And this is our ruling, 2 base versus a 1 base award. Knowing whether if it's a 1 or 2 bases is harder than the 3 base award or the 4 base award. Those are those are easier, as well as the judgment awards. But the 1 and the 2 base awards are the ones that really get us the most. Again, we have another case where we have a shin guard. In this particular case, there's an applied force, and as a result, it transitions from a 1 base award to a 2 base award. And I think that is it. Let me drink more before. It is. Okay, so that's a lot. I realize that, but clearly it's something that we really need to know. And the takeaways here is how many bases and from where is the starting point associated with those awards, and then the umpire judgment as to whether or not it's a 1, 2, or multiple bases, and whether or not we should award or not award at all. So that's kind of an overview of base awards. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to give either Tim, Norm, or I a call. We'd be more than happy to answer your questions. And before I turn it over to Tim, here's our schedule. So our next webinar is going to be on the 24th, and we're going to be talking about pitching violations, hit by pitch. Not sure if we'll get into inclement weather. So we're getting down to the last set of webinars. So again, hopefully these things are valuable. And if you have any questions or comments, keep them coming. And with that, I thank you, and I'll turn it over to Tim, Norm, and Jerry if he has any comments. And I think even John is here if John wants to talk about the special webinar on Thursday.
I have one comment. Greg showed page 50, which is the base running awards table, page 50 from the high school rule book.
Oh.
That's something you might want to memorize. And if you don't memorize well, you might want to take that and get it on an index card and put it in your lineup holder or something like that, so you can refer to it if need be. Because base awards are something that are easily screwed up. And so if you need a quick reference by having that available, then you should maybe make a card and keep it on your person during a game.
And Norm, if I may interject real quick, so that's a good point. you know, when we call balls and strikes, that's judgment. We call fair foul, that's judgment. Okay, but when we make a base award and we make the wrong base award, that is a protestable situation. So that's, I agree with Norm. This is, the base awards is hard, but it is very, very, very important. And we really need to be familiar with where we award from and how many we're going to award. Go ahead, Norm, sorry.
That's it. That's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Greg and Norm. I think we'll call it a night. And as both have said, I can't emphasize enough. You know, I always buy several sets of rule books, and I keep one in the throne room, and I read mostly dead ball, delayed dead ball, and base awards all the time, because in the heat of battle, it's going to be, you're going to be hard pressed to make the right decision. So with that said, good luck to everybody, and we'll catch you at the next webinar.